The election of 1824 was a controversial election, the presidential election of the United States. In fact, controversial presidential elections is almost an institution. I think the second or the third one, maybe even the first one, right? The presidential elections have been controversial. Now, the problem with the 1824 election, it happened in 2000, right? The very first time in 1824, the person who won both the popular vote and he received most of the electoral college votes didn't win. Andrew Jackson basically lost this election due to a corrupt bargain. And it was a corrupt bargain because in 1824, you didn't just have to beat everybody else in the election, you had to have the majority of the votes. You had to have 51%. So you had to have, not just a plurality, which would be if you receive 40% and you beat the other candidates, you would win, but you actually needed the majority of the vote. So the election was a one party election. You had Democrat, Republican, all across the boards. They were, fused together. So it was just one party. John Quincy Adams, Andrew Jackson, and William H. Crawford and Henry Clay. Okay, so it was basically Democrat versus Democrat versus Democrat versus Democrat versus Democrat, and the Democrat that won got pushed out. The election goes to the House of Representatives, and then they decided on a different guy than the people than what the people of the United States had decided upon. Now, the term corrupt bargain has been used for other notable controversies. One of them would be Richard Nixon pardoned Gerald Ford. So Richard Nixon was like, look, I'll drop out, I'll quit, and I'll resign in disgrace. But when I come back, you can't arrest me. So he leaves the White House, right? But Gerald Ford went ahead and pardoned him for all of his crimes, and therefore Nixon got away scot-free with everything that he'd done. The other one was the 1876 election, which had said that Rutherford B. Hayes, Tilden B. Hayes, this would be the end of Reconstruction. They allowed Rutherford B. Hayes to become the president, who was the Republican candidate, as long as the federal troops in the South would pick up and leave. So essentially, they got what they wanted. The end of the federal occupation of the South had stopped. Reconstruction lost, was a failure, and all the Freedmen Bureau and Freedmen people and any radicals were left to the Klan and to the big bankers and the corporations for them to do with them as they see fit. So, corrupt bargain is not a flattering thing to say about anybody. Now, this is Henry Clay. Henry Clay was the one that actually did the corrupt bargain. And anytime anybody wants to say how great Henry Clay was, all you got to do is just say John Quincy Adams, Andrew Jackson, James K. Polk, and then drop the microphone and then take off. Oh yeah, you think fucking Henry fucking Clay was good? Well, he couldn't fucking defeat Andrew Jackson. What about John Quincy Adams? John Quincy Adams beat him in the election. Why? How did John Quincy? Who the fuck is John Quincy Adams? Nobody knows who the fuck. He's the son of John Adams, right? Who was all about Alien and Sedition Acts. So John Quincy Adams, was it the allure of Quincy? Was it his middle name, the Q in Quincy? Just distract fucking Henry Clay to where they lost. The voters was like, yeah, Henry Clay's a good man, but this Q guy, I'm gonna vote Q. And then James K. Polk, he's a fucking lunatic, a fucking psycho. Comes out of nowhere and really changes the entire fucking country. But James K. Polk, Andrew Jackson, John Quincy Adams, Henry Clay, such a badass? Nah, he was just an aristocratic politician. He was a plutocrat. He was part of the owner class, the wealthy, the oligarch, the autocratic, totalitarian, fascist Nazi. He was part of the master class. He was literally a massa, with 60 fucking slaves. So he was part of the aristocratic culture. He supposedly civilized Kentucky, but it just put the veneer of British fucking politics on top of poor man's country. So Henry Clay did not consolidate what Daniel Boone built. Henry Clay fucked up what Daniel Boone built. And that's why Thomas Lincoln and Daniel Boone eventually lost their land titles, because of corrupt fucking lawyers such as Henry Clay, who did really well with the law, right? Of course, he made fucking money, fighting for these big wigs. Henry Clay is going to lose an election, not just this time to Andrew Jackson, but he's going to lose again to Andrew Jackson in 1832. So he's going to run against him here. Jackson won. Andrew Jackson wins the 1824 election due to the popular vote and the Electoral College. But because of some fucking loophole, Henry Clay takes it back into the House of Representatives, and then they vote on John Quincy Adams to become the president, the 6th president of the United States. And so Henry Clay, definitely changed the winds of 1824, but it was the Jacksonians. They called corrupt bargain, and they was able to actually use this election to get Andrew Jackson back in 4 years afterwards, and then he had 8 years to finish off. To get an overview of sort of Henry Clay's times, he's not Daniel Boone and the George Washington era. He's the next era. So he's like from the wars that I will segregate or divide these periods by would be the War of 1812 and the American Civil War. The War of 1812 was all Henry Clay sending out the poor fucking Kentuckians to die for some fucking pointless cause. The Americans wanted to steal Canada, and we weren't able to get it, right? But we did sacrifice a lot of our own people for this Henry Clay War. Now, John Quincy Adams and Henry Clay would go sign the Treaty of Ghent and ends the War of 1812. But that, there was a lot of bloodshed before that had happened. The White House was burnt down by the British. Tecumseh was killed by Richard Minton Johnson, and eventually Richard Minton or Minter Johnson. Richard Johnson, he was the guy supposedly who killed Tecumseh. He's going to take that almost all the way to the White House. I think he does become vice president. Almost didn't become vice president because they had accused him of fathering an illegitimate child with an African American woman. That was enough to fuck up your career in United States presidential politics. That's very slight and very stupid, and fuck you, racist bastards. So the time period, the 1800s. This is before the Civil War, before the big fight against all the states in the United States at the time, north, south, over the slavery. There's also tariffs and some other shit that was going on, but essentially just completely two different societies, and they were trying to stay together. And then eventually they're like, fuck it, if we're gonna lose our slaves, we got to get the fuck out. We're jumping aboard this ship. And Lincoln was like, nah, you joined my club. You in this club for life, nigga. That's what Abraham Lincoln's saying. He's like, nah, motherfucker, you motherfucking American now. You stay American till the day you die. You don't get out of this club. Because you had the Czechoslovakia. They're now the Czech Republic and the Slovak Republic. So when the Slovak Republic wanted to become independent, it didn't turn into a bloody civil war. But the slavery issue just totally cuts it across and makes it a whole nother fucking thing altogether. And of course, Lincoln was right about that shit too. So, the U.S. presidential election of 1824, it was Democrat versus Democrat versus Democrat versus Democrat. It's controversial because the man who won the popular vote, the man who won the Electoral College didn't win, which was Andrew Jackson. Through some parliamentary finagling, parliamentary sort of fucking tricks, they were able to, get John Quincy Adams into the fucking White House. So, they're not going to do the same shit. They're going to change their ways. But this is Henry Clay. You want to know who the fuck Henry Clay is? This is the span of when he ran for president 5 times. I don't know of anybody in the United States who ran for president 5 times except for Ralph Nader and Eugene Debs. those are the only ones. They ran 5 times and they lost each time. Yeah, Henry Clay was one of the major political nominations, but he was nominated by the Whigs. He was nominated by, you know, the fucking anti-Masons or whatever. He wasn't. It was. They were trying to find a third party. They were all Democrat Republicans in 1824. And then they tried to become Whigs. That failed. Millard Fillmore becomes a know-nothing. He loses his Whig fucking nomination. It got crazy. It got really fucking crazy right at the onset of the American Civil War. And then a badass Lincoln comes out of the fucking hills of Kentucky, Indiana, Illinois, and says, hey, this is how we do things where I come from. Jackson County is named after Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson, I would say, actually colors this era more than anybody, any individual. He's known to be for democracy, making everything the popular vote for senators, for House of Representatives. So the Jacksonian idea of democracy is will to the people, power to the people. He also made the bank a big issue in the 1832 presidential election, which Henry Clay takes the wrong side on. He's all about the fucking centralized bank. He's all about the Federal Reserve. He's all about having America with the centralized bank. And then the bank also gave Clay some money, so it just shows you the cronyism and the sort of kickbacks and the pork, you know, Porkopolis. How Washington D.C. was really Porkopolis, even though Cincinnati is the one that has that nickname. The Bank War characterizes the 1832 election. And those are, I'm just going to stick with the elections that he ran in because Henry Clay lost to Andrew Jackson, lost to James K. Polk, lost to John Quincy Adams. He ran 5 times, so there was a board of attempts. He would run in the primary nomination, not get the thing, and then just bow out. But that's an election. He tried, and he didn't fucking succeed. So 5 times. Henry Clay lost 5 fucking times. That aristocratic politician. And you want to sit there and question me because why I say Henry Clay was a politician. You trust all fucking politicians? How many politicians do you just love and embrace? Is there, you know, there's probably very few, I would think. So Jackson County was named in 1858, named for the 7th president of the United States. So John Quincy Adams becomes president, and then right after that, Andrew Jackson becomes president. Another legacy of Andrew Jackson for Kentucky is the Chickasaw lands. They call it the Jackson Purchase. That red area right there in the western part of Kentucky, sort of just the little section there, about what 8 or 9 counties, and that section used to be controlled by the Chickasaw. And so that's where the Chickasaw used to live, but they lived not just in Kentucky, but all the way through Tennessee and Alabama. They had a large chunk. Hernando de Soto ran into them. The Chickasaw were there for quite some time. So they are, you know, firmly entrenched. The rest of Kentucky, I say, could be the Shawnee, the Appalachia, Shawnee, Cherokee, and Yuchi. But this part right here is Chickasaw lands. That's where the Chickasaw mostly lived. They didn't venture too far into Kentucky. They stayed right there. They stayed put. They also owned slaves, and so they were kind of, I don't know, I haven't looked into the Chickasaws as much as I should, because the Chickasaws sound sort of in between, right? They're not purists. They own slaves. Don Cheadle's family, I don't know if it was owned by the Chickasaw, but it was owned by Native Americans, and it's weird to think about. Historically, Native Americans and black folks got screwed over, right, by the historical white man. But the when you have natives owning slaves, it's almost like the oppression is crisscrossing, right? It's like, wait a second, you're historically oppressed, but do you own land and you have or you're trying to be like the white man? You're trying to out white man the white man. You're an asshole. You're a fucking slave owner, so fuck you. You know what I mean? So it's like I can't. Uncle Tom's, I just can't stand. So that's the Jackson Purchase, because Isaac Shelby and Andrew Jackson settled that claim with money or some shit. I don't know. Here's a not a Pequot, a Chickasaw, Native American. He's got feathers in his hair, some sort of mohawk, some sort of bone pin in his ear. I guess there's either claws or ribs, some sort of necklace with beads and arrows. So that's Chickasaw seems actually very stereotypical. Here's actually a cool picture where he's got bald head, painted red, white line going through his eyes. It could have just been a unique way that guy decided to paint himself that day. Here's the Chickasaw domain. There's actually a little piece in Alabama. Most of it was in northern Mississippi, but also western Tennessee and western Kentucky. So the Chickasaw domain, the Chickasaw lands, now called the Jackson Purchase. There's only 5 regions of Kentucky, right? The Pennyroyal, the western, eastern coalfields, the Knobs, bluegrass region. I don't know this, but there are regions in Kentucky, and one of the regions is called the Jackson Purchase, and it should be called the Chickasaw Lands. Just like Cumberland is the Shawnee River. It makes no sense. Kentucky is a Native American name, so why would we not keep all the original Native American names? 1812, we named like 22 counties of Kentucky after those who fell in the War of 1812. How does that make sense? Why would we do that? It makes no sense whatsoever. They lost. They were losers. They tried to invade Native Americans, and the Native Americans wind up killing them. That is not something that we do not want to honor. That is not heroic. That just they used Kentucky hunters as cannon fodder for the imperialistic war machine. Leave us the fuck alone. We got our hills, we got our house and our dog and our wife and our land. So let us fucking raise our tomatoes in peace. Here's the Chickasaw guy that I thought was pretty cool, the way he painted himself up. Earrings, nose ring, has black sort of eye, like a band going underneath his eyes, and his whole head is painted red. He's got some facial tattoos, neck tattoos, chest tattoos, long hair, earrings in the upper part of his ears, and also a feather, I guess, coming out of his sort of ponytail, mohawk-like ponytail on the back of his head, which doesn't make sense. I don't know why you would have anything that the enemy could grab a hold of, but maybe the idea is you can keep that away from the enemy or something. I don't know. So the November 1824 election, 131 electoral votes, just over half of the 261 total, were necessary to elect a candidate president, and had no bearing on the outcome of the election. Popular votes were counted for the first time. So it's the first time they even counted the people's vote, because it was all about refining the people's opinion through the Electoral College. And there's no bigger institution in America that shows how we don't have a democracy than the Electoral College. If all the people of Kentucky voted for Ralph Nader in one of the elections, and the Electoral College says, fuck you, the people of Kentucky, we're going to put all of our votes for Henry Clay, who's been dead for many years, and it makes no sense whatsoever, they can do that. They can take our votes and vote for whoever they want to vote for. We have 8 votes, right? So even though, 1 million Kentuckians goes out to vote for presidential elections, it's the electors of the Electoral College that actually throws the votes between, to one or two or both of the candidates. Traditionally, if they win the popular vote, they all vote for the candidate the state voted for. But that doesn't have to be true. It could be proportional. And fuck the Electoral College. Why do we have, Jacksonian democracy was good, but it didn't go far enough. And it was racist, right? Jacksonian, big thing with Andrew Jackson was that the Indian land removal. You had the Trail of Tears, and the Trail of Tears happened under Andrew Jackson's watch, and so it was total bullshit. The Choctaw, the Chickasaw, the Indian Removal Act. So that's why we have the Jackson Purchase. That's when he kicked the Chickasaw out of Kentucky. The Jackson County was named in 1858, so that was right after he was the president, right before the Civil War. There's also the Mexican War that happened in 1846 under James K. Polk. Again, Henry Clay, he chose the right issue. Henry Clay's just a politician. He just doesn't have any consistent fucking morality whatsoever. His 2 biggest accomplishments is the Compromise of 1820 and the Missouri Compromise of 1850. So I think that's right, or maybe I got their switched. But there's 2 big compromises that that placated the slave-owning states and the rest of the states, and the nation still trucked forward. But he was a compromiser, and so he's known as the Great Compromiser, the Great Pacificator. Well, that doesn't give me chills going down my spine. That's probably why he didn't become fucking president. The Great Compromiser. The great man who doesn't have any morals, doesn't have a moral core, and is willing to compromise. I know people say compromise is part of a democracy, but to be known as a compromiser, that's just, no wonder he fucking lost his presidency. And he has that quote, "I'd rather be right than to be president," which suggests that he doesn't compromise. Well, but unfortunately, Henry fucking Clay, the aristocratic politician, is a fucking compromiser. It's what he does. He's also for the banks. He was a Whig Party candidate. He did the corrupt bargain where he got Andrew Jackson, screwed Andrew Jackson over, and then they would battle it out for years. Really to the downfall of Kentucky. Kentucky didn't get a lot of the public works projects because Andrew Jackson was the president. This was all before the Civil War, so really all he did was postpone his great fucking achievements, just postponed the inevitable. So instead of, waiting for the Civil War to happen under Lincoln, it could have happened at any time, and, who knows who could have won that. You also had the California Gold Rush and the Texas Revolution. So those are some of the things that happened during Henry Clay's time. So to understand Henry Clay, we're just going to go through each one of his elections. So this one, we already mentioned about this, but it's actually got the numbers on here. So Andrew Jackson won 99 electoral votes and then 153,000 popular votes. He received 84 electoral and 108,000 popular. So the John Adams, he was he lost, right? But he eventually won because they know how to fucking twist the fucking tools of government in their favor. So, thanks to Clay's backing, on February 9th, 1825, the House elected John Quincy Adams as President of the United States. What did John Quincy Adams do as a president? As he goes down as the fucking greatest president we've ever fucking had? No. Fucking bald ass, weird ass aristocrat, fucking short, skinny dude. He ain't that bad, but, who the fuck is he? Right? His vice president is John C. Calhoun, which I think is a notable fucking racist. So he's still part of the rich owner aristocratic class, an autocrat, totalitarian fascist. Before he dies, he actually does come out against slavery, and but he was only allowed to serve one term. He was only in there for one term, and then they made him sit down. So how good of a president could he have been if he'd only been in there for one term? Doesn't mean it wasn't good, because James K. Polk did a lot of shit in his one term. A lot of these presidents can do a lot of shit in their one term. But Quincy, that's who beat you, Clay. What the fuck, man? Andrew Jackson, he removed the 5 civilized tribes, supposedly so-called civilized tribes. Right? Really, who the fuck are they to say who is civilized and who isn't? They, went ahead and systematically genocided the fuck out of all these natives, including the Trail of Tears, Chickasaw, Choctaw, Muskego Creek, Seminole, and the original Cherokee nations. They established an autonomous nation in southeastern United States. The acculturation proposed by George Washington, well-known Indian genocider, Kanata Carius, a town destroyer, was well underway. Also raised hemp, right? Wrote the fucking Constitution and Declaration on hemp paper. Thomas Jefferson and him would have hemp blends. They would be sharing on the porch together. Just, dreaming up a nation and how to oppress everybody through revolution, right? Through propaganda. So among the Cherokee and Choctaw, Jefferson's policy had been to respect the Native Americans' right to their homelands, allowing all Native Americans who had adopted Anglo-European behavior to remain east of the Mississippi, plan to guide them towards practicing an agricultural-based society. I don't know where this... it's the fucking Removal Act, right? It's the Trail of Tears. So fuck that bastard. Here's sort of a map of the Trail of Tears. You see where the Chickasaw lands are. And actually, this is way south of Kentucky. This is in really south, eastern. But they took Chickasaw lands, right? So the Chickasaw had to get out. And you see where they all marched. They all went to Oklahoma, Choctaw, Chickasaw, Creek, and Seminole, and Cherokee lands. So Oklahoma is just, it seems like, where all the reservations are. Which is, I don't know. What the fuck? That's like Cherokee. The Seminole had to fucking, they had to fucking cross from all the way here. Or no, this is Seminole. Man, what the hell? The Seminole, did they go to New Orleans? They sailed from the Florida and got on a ship and then went up the stream on a ferry. The way I understand the Trail of Tears is they all walked and carried the stuff that they had. And a bunch of them died on the way. So you see where the Cherokee, the Creek, Chickasaw, right? So this is Andrew Jackson. The Supreme Court said that his Indian Removal Act is illegal, and Andrew Jackson said, "Oh, that's really fucking great. Let the Supreme Court justice enforce his fucking law now," and basically called his fucking bitch ass out. So Clay originated, Jackson's personal animosity towards Clay originated in 1819 when Clay denounced Jackson for his unauthorized invasion of the Spanish West Florida in the previous year. Clay was also instrumental in John Quincy Adams winning the presidency from Jackson in 1824. So the first one, right? He fucking is Spanish West Florida. So Jackson is just fucking killing Indians where the fuck he wants to, and Clay's like, "Hey, you can't do that." Clay is also going to criticize James K. Polk in the Mexican War. That's something I could say is good. He also is encouraging of the Latin American countries for their actualization into independence and made diplomatic relationships with him. So his heart seems to be in the right spot, but he never actually actualized it as the oppressed getting power. The U.S. presidential election in 1832, Henry Clay is the biggest competitor for the National Republicans against Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson's from Tennessee, Henry Clay's from Kentucky, and then they run against William Wirt, who is the first third-party candidate in the United States, and he's the anti-Masonic party. So the Mason lodges, I just voted actually in November in a Masonic lodge in Hudson, Kentucky, in Breckinridge County. So the Masonic lodges, they're a secret society, and they're all over the place, right? All these forefathers were part of this shit, and so that was actually a big enough thing to be against. I'm against the Masonic Lodge. So the Democrats versus the National Republicans, and eventually when Clay loses, that's the end of the National Republicans, but we will see a resurgence of the Republican Party as a third party in 1861. Abraham Lincoln was the first Republican president. So the name National Republican was in Henry Clay, 1832. He's going to run as a Whig later on, and then so he don't know who the fuck he is, right? He don't know if he's a Federalist, a Democrat, Republican, a Whig. He's just all over the place. It's the first national election for Martin Van Buren of New York. He's put in a ticket to succeed John C. Calhoun. So the election of 1832, this was the Bank War. This is when Henry Clay went against Andrew Jackson. Again, his old nemesis, right? He had fucked Andrew Jackson's presidential chances in 1824, and then 1828. Andrew Jackson becomes the president. The Trail of Tears actually happens in 1838. And so I guess Jackson put it into effect, and then some other fucking president carried it out. I don't know. Yeah. So that's all I'm gonna say about the 1832 election. There is, Richard Minton Johnson. He ran in this and lost the vice presidential vote. Supporters of Henry Clay called a national convention of the National Republican Party. They nominated Clay officially. All right, so things are just a little bit different. This is 18. Also, think about the time period in the 1800s. This is before radio, TV, internet, phones, cars, before really modern technology. So Henry Clay is supposed to be the epitome of success because he used all those slaves and built them a big ass house. So look at him. He is, a diplomat. He speaks well. He speaks good English. He's a politician. He's got a big house. He knows what's going on. He knows what's up. Says it was unique by the standards of the time as the first time that the respected parties would hold nominating conventions. It also included for the first time the introduction of a third party, the Anti-Masons. The three nominees were the incumbent, Andrew Jackson on the Democratic ticket, Henry Clay for the Republicans, National Republicans, and William Wirt for the Anti-Masons. The president of the This is interesting. The president of the Anti-Masons was a great help to Jackson's campaign as it pulled favor from the Republicans. So why would the Anti-Masons pulled favor from the Republicans? So they're saying that they took Republican votes. So Jackson was a Mason. Is that what we're saying? Andrew Jackson was a Freemason. The election of 1832 was a referendum over the bank issue. Henry Clay was all about the banks, and Andrew Jackson was against the banks. And actually, he got threatened for it because how dare you make the bank an issue? The bank is just the fucking center power, you know. Biddle, he threatens to make Jackson pay the penalty for making the bank party question. He spent $100,000 on the election, sent out 30,000 copies of the veto message in hope that Jackson's own words would be his own doing. The Jacksonians did the same thing, but their aim was to compare the veto message to the Declaration of Independence by calling the institution a gambler's bank. So they went after the bank pretty hard. Jackson and his advisors recognized that the bank issue could bury their chances of re-election, so they decided to win the election by hiding the issue behind Old Hickory himself. They allowed Clay and the supporters to campaign with brochures and newspapers. Jackson literally took to the streets. The idea was that fireworks, barbecues, and parades would have had more of an influence than newspapers and brochures. So actually talking to people, passing out food, having big-ass displays, having big old fucking parades, that's how Andrew Jackson was going to win, through the bombast and through the reaching out to the people instead of just passing out brochures and printed fucking copies of shit. He was actually going to reach people by talking to people and looking them in their eyes and shaking their hands and speaking right to them. So the idea worked, and Jackson was reelected despite the efforts of Biddle and his supporters, and he gained an edge in the bank war. So, yeah, that was a mandate. That was a referendum on the fucking banks. So, Andrew Jackson could do what he wanted to do. In the 1836 election, which would be the next one, the Democrat-Republican presidential candidate Martin Van Buren won both the popular and electoral vote, and then he made Richard Mentor Johnson his vice president. So, but there was something weird about that because Richard Minton Johnson did not fare so well upon hearing the allegation that Johnson had children with an African-American woman. The 23 Democratic Republican electors of Virginia refused to give him their votes. So the fucking Virginians were racist as shit. It didn't even say it was illegal, just that he had children with a woman. Thomas Jefferson had children with a fucking woman. Was he from Virginia? Like, what the fuck? Like, y'all have some hypocritical viewpoints about a lot of shit. Eventually, Johnson gets he wins the thing. So, we already saw through this, but this is, again, these are the controversial elections, right? 1836 was controversial, and then 1824 was controversial. And, Andrew Jackson, he won a slight plurality in the popular vote and the Electoral College, but eventually he gets fucked. Andrew Jackson gets fucked. 99 electoral votes right there, but John Quincy Adams somehow won. And look at John Quincy. He ain't got no hair. He's old, shriveled up. He was right on the slavery issue at the end of his life. I don't know what his presidential tenure was looking all about. Here is the election of 1836. There was two Whigs, Daniel Webster, Willie Person Magnum, Martin Van Buren, William H. Harrison, and Hugh L. White. So 4 Whigs and the Democrat ran. So the Whig Party coming up strong, right? And then you're going to have 1840, and then 1844, Henry Clay is going to run as a Whig. So, like a powdered wig, like George Washington. So James K. Polk, okay, he eventually wins the election against Henry Clay. So Henry Clay is the Whig Party, and then James K. Polk fucking thrashes Henry Clay. Henry Clay was a war hawk with the 1812, but he didn't want to acquire Mexico and start a war with Mexico over the issue of Texas. And that he lost votes in the South because of that, and in Texas because of that. And James K. Polk wins the election with the mandate to go to war with Mexico, and he uses that mandate. He lies. He says, yeah, they fired on us. They didn't. Americans were in Mexican territory, and they were defending themselves. But it doesn't matter when it comes to a president declaring war in the United States. If he lies and says we need to do it, you just denounce everybody else for their lack of patriotism. That's Goebbels. That's Hitler's propagandist. right? What, you against America? You want us to fail? You want us to lose? Is that what you're trying to say? You want us to lose? I want you to lose. I want America to succeed. So the James K. Polk, he's he basically does come out of nowhere. He starts as a state representative, reelected 6 times, served for a total of 14 years. He was in politics for a long fucking time. The last 4 years, he was the Speaker of the House. He served only 2 years as the governor of Tennessee. And then after that, he wanted to become the next vice president during 1844. And then out of nowhere, he snagged the popular vote and become the youngest president at the time at age 49. And so that was his, he was state representative for 14 years, then governor of Tennessee for 2 years. So he didn't even serve out his term, wanted to become president. So he become governor. So he just becomes state representative, then governor, then president. And that's how he won. So he did many things while he was in there. He reestablished a system that kept America's money in its treasury. So central bank, again, reduced tariffs from the black tariff, less than the Walker tariff. So he's a protectionist. He pressured Britain to give us the greatly disputed Oregon country as our new territory. Got us land in the north, got us land in the south, obtained California and New Mexico after winning the Mexican-American War, and he admitted Texas into the Union, and it became a state. So he expanded the fucking country probably, twice as much. He was a racist bastard, but, he did change what the fuck the country looks like and what we think of America today. He also lied, too, so, there could be historical justification for Mexicans saying they want their land back. So, are they crossing into our country or just reoccupying what they had started to occupy to begin with? For the first time in their history, the Whigs held a national convention to determine their presidential candidate. This is the 1841. Henry Clay actually wins, the presidential votes inside the fucking House or Senate or whatever it is, or the convention. But eventually he throws his votes away. So he wins all 4 elections, and then he says, like, fuck it, give your votes to Harrison. So for some reason, Clay lost the convention. So he tried again. This is, he ran 5 times for president. Didn't make the nomination for this. So it was just like, fuck it, I ain't even going to try now. Fuck it, y'all don't want to pick me. I ain't even going to be here. I ain't going to try. So, the Whig Party, they came back. So eventually, I guess William Henry Harrison is voted in. He dies of pneumonia. Tyler comes up. He's a shitty Whig. And then after Tyler steps down, it's 1844. And the 1844 election is James K. Polk versus Henry Clay. Again, Henry Clay. James K. Polk is the Democratic Republican, and then Henry Clay is the Whig. He's the Whig. So Polk wanted to push Mexico to negotiate with the United States. He was willing to create a threat of war to do this. If he had to fight, he wanted a short war and a quick victory. He never expected a long, drawn-out war. The army was not ready for war and never fought so far from home before. The country was divided. After the Mexican-American War, you're going to see the rise of native-born Louisville, native-born Zachary Taylor. And Zachary Taylor is going to become president. He's a Whig / know-nothing. Millard Fillmore basically Millard Fillmore started as a Whig, becomes a know-nothing, and then the Republican Party says, fuck this one-party system, and says, we're the second party. And then after Abraham Lincoln got into office, it's been Democrats and Republicans ever since. Since 1861, 2 fucking parties, 2 political parties. Essentially just liberal v conservative, whatever they want to define those terms as at that time. Sometimes conservative means to conserve liberty and freedom and resources so we're not spending our treasure for imperialism. Other times conservative just means to keep the shit going. We've been doing this forever, let's just keep it going. Conserve the traditions and the history. So those words can be manipulated. Liberal in liberty, liberal in freedom, liberal in social spending, liberal in anarchy, basically liberal democracy. The way political scientists talk about liberalism, it's liberal democracies have won, but neoliberalism, which is the conservative of today, neoliberalism The so-called Washington Consensus is something completely different, right? They are an empire. They get to do as the fuckers they please. Neoliberal. So that liberal, does that mean peace or does that mean imperialist? And if they're imperialist, how is that different than the conservatives? It's not. So, um, you know, he needed an excuse to declare war, expecting at the most to fight a few skirmishes. The general commanding their troops in the rear, Grandson, a force across the river and ambushed a detachment of Americans, killed or captured all of them. The American general Zachary Taylor reported this action as a Mexican attack and concluded, I presume this means the beginning of war. Polk and his cabinet prepared a declaration of war. So Zachary Taylor went ahead and just pushed it into fucking war, right? They're saying that they got attacked. But while were they there? They kept pushing on it. I don't fucking believe them. The Mexican War, just like the Spanish-American War and World War One, it was all started by lies. Just like Iraq, right? Just like Vietnam. It's all fucking lies. The fucking president says we must go to war or else, we'll all die, we'll all perish. Ronald Reagan was trying to say that shit about Grenada. The little tiny fucking island of Grenada. But really what he meant is that the communists have won an election there and he's scared that it's going to go communist. 1848, again, Henry Clay tries, but he drops right back out. The Free Soil Party was in there. Dutch Reformed. Oh, that's his religion, the Episcopal, Unitarian, Dutch Reformed. Millard Fillmore, Unitarian. I think Ronnie Lee Smith was a Unitarian. But there's nothing about Henry Clay in that. So Millard Fillmore is just a fucking asshole. That's sort of how I'm going to end it because it's before the Civil War. The rise of the Know Nothing Party, the rise of the Whig Party, lots of dissension amongst the ranks, the slavery issue. The 1844, they lost that election. The Whigs did because they were not as pro-slavery as they purported to be, or against slavery. So the Liberty Party siphoned off Whig votes, just sort of like Nader did with the Democrats, because Henry Clay wouldn't just say fuck slavery. He didn't just come right out and say fuck it. I'm not going to do the slavery fucking bullshit. And so then 1848, Zachary Taylor eventually wins, not because of his viewpoints, but because he was the fucking hero of the war. We're warmongering society, and he was the one at the fucking Western expansion. So hopefully he knows what's going on, right? He's an independent thinker, and maybe an independent thinker is just what this nation needs. He's also from Louisville, so one of the few Kentuckians that you could say this city created for America. Whig Party. It was named after like the Patriots. They called the Patriots the Whigs in the American Revolution. Daniel Webster, William Henry Harrison, Henry Clay, Zachary Taylor, Winfield Scott were all Whigs. John Tyler, he succeeded to the presidency after Harrison's death. Millard Fillmore, yeah, we know about all this shit. So again, Millard Fillmore remaining loyal to Henry Clay, heading into the Whig nominating convention. The presidency would elude Clay yet again. Pro-slavery forces in the party mistrusted his compromise policies. Meanwhile, the recent Mexican War had made heroes of Zachary Taylor and Winfield Scott. Both were courted by the Whigs. Their nicknames spoke of the contrast in their styles. Zachary Taylor was an unsophisticated man of little education, right? Like Abraham Lincoln, like Tecumseh, like Daniel Boone, who never voted, was called Old Rough and Ready, whereas Winfield Scott was refined and pompous, Old Fuss and Feathers. I'd rather be Old Rough and Ready than Old Fuss and Feathers. Andrew Jackson was elected to the presidency in 1828. Military leaders with the rough-hewn public persona, genuine or not, been popular with the voters. Teddy Roosevelt's going to use that to his advantage. Yeah, so it's, I don't know. The Gilded Age is known for having sort of irrelevant presidents. So who ran America during the Gilded Age? That would have been your bankers, your corporations, and your wealthy people. So it would have been your industrialists, your Carnegies, your Rockefellers, your J.P. Morgans. They were the presidents of America during the Gilded Age, and then we're going to see the rise of the working class in the beginning of the 1900s. So it was directly, because of the unregulated sort of laissez-faire, let the industrialists do as the fuck as they please. They industrialized the country, right? Got good jobs, but they were also horrible with safety. They let children work in their factories. A lot of people died. And so it was, it wasn't as great. Is that a revolution? It's a industrial revolution. So we're able to mass produce Model T cars eventually by the 1900s. But if you're dead, that doesn't really help you, right? And so, anyways, American wars often, and that's also a different economy than what we got now. We had manufacturing jobs were, there's a few still around. They're good jobs still, but where are they at? They're gone. We can't just go to a factory, expect to make a good ass fucking living, and do well for the rest of our life. We're in a global we're in an ever fucking changing era. Every fucking minute, every day, there's some brand new technological breakthrough, some new development. It's the Gutenberg printing press revolution, for the world. So American wars usually start with a lie, right? Mexican-American War. James K. Polk sided an attack on American troops in Texas. Troops he had deliberately placed there to provoke Mexico. Kind of like how we're right now setting bombers and shit up on the eastern bloc of Europe to prevent Russia from coming over. That's Russia was playing war games like that, but now we're putting them on the fucking coast. You know what I mean? Like, what you going to do now? And having a standing army staring at people like that, it's not good, man. Spanish-American War is going to do the same shit. President William McKinley claimed the warship USS Maine had been blown up by Spanish saboteurs in 1898. That's when we became an empire. It's also after the Civil War, so this is way past where we need to be. But just the Vietnam War moved into high gear under LBJ with the Gulf of Tonkin resolution. So, you know. James K. Polk, he lies. He's a liar. He's a liar. But eventually, he fucking won the presidency. And isn't that really all that America's about? It doesn't matter if you're a good person or a bad person, have good or bad policies. What really matters is if you win. That's all that fucking matters. So, James K. Polk wanted to acquire Mexican territory. He hoped for a fucking fight, was itching for a fight, was voted in because of his policy to annex Texas into the Union. And he's also, they say he's a fitting representative of the expansionist impulse known as the Manifest Destiny. As a condition of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, ended the Mexican War, the government of Mexico ceded the U.S. a vast amount of territory that included the present state of California. Manifest Destiny, more like genocidal fucking Western imperialist motherfuckers. You might actually say that America didn't start to become an empire in 1898. We started being an empire in 1492. That was the British Empire, the Spanish Empire, French Empire, who was extending their empire. And ever since then, right, they grabbed land that wasn't theirs. They kept grabbing land and kept grabbing land. Still grabbing land today, all across the world. 900 military bases in 150 countries. That's not for freedom. That's a goddamned empire. It's not for peace. It's for the imperialist fucking banking corporation fucking elites. So they say he's a successful one-term president. He did do a lot of fucking big changes, He's the 11th president. They say he can't catch a break. Who the fuck even talks about James K. Polk? I don't know anybody who mentions any of this stuff. Nobody gives a shit about American history, especially Americans. In polls of historians, he ranks high, 11th in the aggregate ranking of 12 academic polls. Controversies, animosities. This is, I believe Henry Clay was right because he was against war. But eventually the war was successful, so Henry Clay just basically backed the wrong fucking wars. He's an aristocrat. What the fuck does an aristocrat know about war? A general out in the field, they understand war. They understand, the pulse of the nation. when you're up in an ivory tower in a fucking elitist, aristocratic political tower, you probably don't see what the fuck is actually going on. So Henry Clay was pro the War of 1812, which was a resounding defeat. So that would be the first Vietnam, would be the War of 1812, and then the Mexican American War of 1846 would have been a success because they won the war, they got territory, they expanded their borders, right or wrong, right? They won the war. And I'm not saying it's a good thing, but in terms of the overall victory, one war expanded America and the other war just drained our treasury and killed a lot of Kentuckians. So I don't know who really hates James K. Polk. He comes out of nowhere, just like Barack Obama, right? Just out of nowhere, right? They've been in politics for a while, but as soon as they got onto the presidential scene, they just took it. They just said, I'm going to fucking do it, and then they did it. Nobody stops them. So, in that sense, Polk is fucking phenomenal. He was only a one-term president, which I think is fucking wild, too, right? That would have been in 1844. So by 1848, he wasn't president no more. So the skirmish occurred on the disputed territory, right? It's not Mexican or American. They said, this is our land, no, that's your land. And so Polk just sends his fucking troops into the disputed territory, and that precipitated a war. So I guess that's how you're going to fucking do it, right? Go start a fucking fight. And then once they had killed 11 Americans, and Polk said, hey, I need some money and guns. Let's do this shit. Everybody went ahead and done it. So actually, I will treasure Henry Clay. He loved the fucking Latin American independence movement, and he hated the Mexican War. So I'm gonna find out what Henry Clay, the fucking big bank man, the fucking schizophrenic, pro-slavery, anti-slavery fucker, fucking douchebag, aristocratic politician, compromising here, compromising there, the great compromiser, the man with no moral scruples, the man that had no fucking, just had no consistent values, didn't have any consistent morality or anything. He was just an opportunist, right? An opportunist who, just kind of, he was like water. If anything, he's the Bruce Lee of American politics. He's like water. He kind of looked like he was going to do it, but he never fucking did it, right? So I'm surprised that he was even able to get his house built. If he didn't have other people doing it, he probably wouldn't have been able to do it. When it comes to him being a competent person to actually complete the goal himself, he seems to really fucking suck. He sucked at the War of 1812. He sucked at the colonization efforts. He sucked at pretty much every fucking thing that he did. He sucked at running for president. He was good at compromise. So whenever there was a big fucking issue, he just ran around all the United States saying, hey, why don't we just compromise? Hey, compromise. That was sort of the governor of Kentucky's prime motivation, right? He wanted to compromise and say, hey, North, look, we won't secede if you let us have slavery. He tried to pull a quick one, right? And, what's his name? That motherfucker. The governor of Kentucky. Magafin. So James K. Polk with the slicked fucking hair and a mullet. So James K. Polk had a fucking mullet, right? He was basically the first Billy Ray Cyrus president. Fucking redneck, fucking, where did he come from? Tennessee, right? He'd been operating in backwards fucking land. But hell, he dressed like one of those motherfuckers. He'd been a governor, so he knows how to be an executive. So that's all the experience you need. Hell, get on board. Let's become fucking president, James K. Polk. It's this asshole here. They said the least known consequential president. That's a good fucking name for him. He was a very consequential president, and nobody fucking knows who the fuck this guy is. Right? Who? I don't know him. Who the hell is that? Invasion of Mexico. We're going to see Henry Clay come up here, or are we just going to end it off on a low note? The Liberty Party I thought was fascinating in 1844, right? They siphoned off the votes, but had the Whig Party actually been against slavery in 1844, they would have won that election. But since they had made their decision, they were trying to be schizophrenic. Now, we know where they stand. Where the fuck do y'all stand? We ain't gonna say. Nah, we're running a blank slate. Nah, I know they're standing for shit, but we ain't gonna stand for nothing. Like the modern day Democratic Party. All right? Map Mexico in 1845 with the Republic of Texas. The Republic of Yucatan, disputed territory between Mexico and Texas in red. Disputed territory, but for who, right? I could just say, hell, I owned all the fucking Mexico, you know? That's a disputed territory. Just march into Mexico. And then, you know, like, give me a fucking break. Give me a fucking break. So in a message to Congress, he says, Mexico invaded our territory and shed American blood upon American soil. He lies, right? That didn't actually fucking happen. But when you hear that, you're like, shit, they're invading us on our soil. No, they can't do that. We're allowed to defend they're allowed to defend themselves, but we're allowed to defend ourselves, right? Well, it wasn't for defense. So just like Hitler, right? Freedom, democracy, for peace. You know, we got to declare war for peace. Like, fucking for virginity. And people buy it. They eat it up. People get scared. Some Whigs, such as Abraham Lincoln, challenged Polk's version of events, but Congress overwhelmingly approved the declaration of war. Many Whigs feared that opposition would cost them politically by casting themselves as unpatriotic for not supporting the war effort. So again, the fucking commander-in-chief declares a war. You're not a patriot if you don't go along with it. Anti-slavery Whigs led by John Q. Adams, right? He comes back. He's not content with just being president for a year. He comes back as a fucking representative and a senator. He never fucking leaves D.C. Even John C. Calhoun was an opponent of the Declaration. So that's fucking fascinating, right? Calhoun, Quincy Adams, Abraham Lincoln, Henry Clay, they're all against this fucking thing. And what were they saying? We'll find out. Coming up next on Fuck Isaac Shelby, the father of Kentucky. Fuck Isaac Shelby.